The old metal detector hadn't beeped in months. But on this quiet autumn evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, it screamed to life with a sound Thomas hadn't heard in his 40 years of treasure hunting. His weathered hands trembled as he knelt in his backyard, ignoring the protest of his aging knees. The detector's signal grew stronger, more urgent, unlike anything he'd encountered before. 6 feet down, he found it, a seamless metallic cube, roughly the size of a softball, covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change as he brushed away decades of dirt. The object was warm to his touch, impossibly smooth, and completely unmarked by time. As his fingers traced one of the flowing patterns, a soft blue light pulsed beneath the surface. Thomas nearly dropped it when a gentle vibration began humming through his palms. Then it happened. The cube lifted itself from his hands, hovering at eye level. Light spilled from its surface, forming a holographic display that filled his entire field of vision. In crystal-clear English, words materialized in the air: Human Guardian Protocol, activated last access, 15,000 years ago purpose, restoration of forgotten legacy warning. What you are about to learn will forever change humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. Thomas stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest, as the cube continued its impossible display. More text appeared: You have been chosen. Your species once walked among the stars. The time has come to remember. The hologram flickered, showing glimpses of impossible things, vast cities that stretched into the clouds, vehicles that defied gravity, and beings that looked almost human but somehow more. Then everything went dark except for one final message: Do you accept your role in humanity's awakening? Thomas, a 70-year-old man who had lived a quiet, ordinary life, found himself facing a decision that would reshape the future of human civilization. The cube waited silently for his answer, its gentle hum the only sound in the gathering dusk. His arthritic finger reached out, trembling, toward the floating question mark that would change everything. The quiet morning after finding the cube felt surreal. Thomas sat at his kitchen table, staring at the device that now rested innocently between his coffee mug and morning newspaper. The blue glow had dimmed, but occasional pulses of light rippled across its surface like waves on a pond. For 40 years, he'd lived alone in this small house on the outskirts of town. After retiring from his job as a mechanical engineer at the local factory, his days had fallen into a comfortable routine: morning coffee, tending his vegetable garden, and occasional metal detecting to keep his mind sharp. His neighbors knew him as the kind old man who fixed their broken appliances and shared fresh tomatoes in summer. But now, everything felt different. The morning sun streaming through his window seemed brighter somehow. Even the aches in his joints that had plagued him for years felt less intense. He reached for the cube, noting how it warmed at his touch, responding like a living thing. "What exactly are you?" he whispered, turning it gently in his hands. The patterns on its surface shifted, forming new configurations he couldn't quite follow. His engineering background told him this was impossible: materials didn't behave this way. Yet here it was, defying everything he knew about physics and metallurgy. Thomas spent hours examining the cube, making careful notes in his old leather-bound journal. He sketched the changing patterns, recorded the timing of the light pulses, and documented every detail he could observe. Old habits died hard. Even faced with the impossible, he approached it like the engineer he'd always been. By afternoon, he discovered that certain patterns appeared when he thought specific questions. The cube was responding to his mind, not just his touch. When he wondered about its origin, it displayed star maps he didn't recognize. When he questioned its purpose, it showed him glimpses of human figures achieving extraordinary things. But it was when he accidentally dozed off in his armchair that things became truly extraordinary. In his dreams, he saw crystal cities on distant worlds, watched as beings that looked like evolved humans worked with technology beyond his comprehension. He saw great ships crossing the space between stars, carrying countless souls to new homes among the cosmos. When he jolted awake, the cube was hovering again, its light brighter than before. Text appeared in the air, initial neural connection established. Beginning primary knowledge transfer. Thomas felt a tingling sensation spread from his fingertips up his arms. The stiffness in his shoulders, a constant companion for decades, began to fade. He watched in amazement as the liver spots on his hands lightened slightly, the skin becoming just a bit firmer. "Good Lord," he breathed, flexing his fingers. They moved without the usual arthritic pain. Looking closer at his reflection in the window, he noticed subtle changes in his face. Nothing dramatic, but his skin looked healthier, more vital. As the sun set, Thomas realized he hadn't eaten all day, yet he felt more energetic than he had in years. The cube had to be doing something to him, changing him somehow. Part of him knew he should be terrified, should call authorities or at least his doctor. But a deeper instinct told him this was right, that this was meant to be. He carefully placed the cube on his bedside table that night, watching as it pulsed softly in the darkness. Just before sleep took him, he heard, or perhaps felt, words forming in his mind. "Tomorrow, we begin remembering who you really are." Thomas drifted off with a smile, knowing his life of quiet retirement had transformed into something far more extraordinary. The adventure he'd always secretly hoped for had finally found him, not in his youth, but here in his golden years. And somehow, that felt exactly right. That night, Thomas dreamed with unprecedented clarity. He found himself walking through corridors of light, surrounded by knowledge that flowed like water into his mind. The cube wasn't just showing him information, it was teaching him to understand things his human brain had never been designed to grasp. He saw humanity's true history unfold before him. Long ago, humans hadn't been limited to Earth. They had been part of something greater, something magnificent. The images came in waves, vast networks of interconnected civilizations, technologies that worked in harmony with nature, and humans who had evolved far beyond their current capabilities. When morning came, Thomas sat up in bed feeling different. His mind was sharper, clearer than it had been in decades. Random scientific formulas and engineering concepts he'd never studied floated through his thoughts. He understood principles of physics that went far beyond his old mechanical engineering knowledge. Walking to the bathroom, he noticed his reflection and gasped. The man staring back at him looked at least 5 years younger. His silver hair had regained some of its thickness, and the deep wrinkles around his eyes had softened. But the most striking change was in his eyes. They seemed to hold a new light, a depth that hadn't been there before. The cube hummed softly from his bedside table, its patterns shifting faster now. When he touched it, the connection felt stronger, more natural. Images and information flowed more easily between them, like old friends sharing memories. "Why me?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling slightly. The cube's response came not in words but in feelings and images. He saw himself as the machine saw him, a mind still open to wonder, untainted by cynicism despite his age. Someone who had maintained his curiosity and kindness through decades of solitude. Throughout the day, Thomas experienced moments of profound understanding. He would be doing something mundane, like making his morning toast, when suddenly he'd grasp the complex quantum principles behind matter transformation. While watering his garden, he understood how ancient civilizations had terraformed entire planets. But it wasn't all pleasant. Sometimes the knowledge brought pain, glimpses of great civilizations falling, of humanity forgetting its heritage, of being sealed away on Earth like children placed in a protective playpen. The cube shared his sorrow during these moments, its light dimming to a soft, comforting glow. By evening, Thomas noticed his neighbors watching his house with unusual interest. Mrs. Henderson from next door pointed out that his garden was blooming out of season. Somehow, the plants near his house were growing with impossible vigor, as if responding to an unseen energy. That night, as he sat in his favorite chair, the cube projected a message he'd been both expecting and dreading: others will come soon. They will sense the changes. Are you prepared to protect what you've been given? Thomas looked at his steadier hands, felt the new strength in his body, and remembered the wonders he'd seen in his dreams. He thought about humanity's forgotten potential, about the responsibility he'd been given. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive, truly purposeful. Yes, he answered firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. I'm ready. The cube's light pulsed brighter, and Thomas felt a surge of something like pride flowing through their connection. Whatever came next, he knew he wasn't facing it alone. Together, they would help humanity remember what it had forgotten, even if the path ahead wouldn't be easy. As if confirming his thoughts, a car he didn't recognize drove slowly past his house, its tinted windows reflecting the setting sun. The adventure was about to begin in earnest. The black sedan returned the next morning, parking across the street. Thomas watched through his kitchen window as two men in dark suits stepped out, their movements too precise to be ordinary government workers. The cube pulsed urgently on the table beside him, sharing his concern. Through their strengthening mental connection, Thomas learned why the machine had chosen this moment in history to reveal itself. Humanity stood at a crossroads, on the brink of either self-destruction or an evolutionary leap. The cube had waited thousands of years for the right conditions, and more importantly, the right person. As he absorbed this knowledge, Thomas noticed more changes in himself. His morning walk had turned into a light jog without any fatigue. The reading glasses he'd needed for 20 years now sat unused on his desk. Even his hearing had sharpened, he could make out the agent's whispered conversation from across the street. The energy signatures are strongest here, one said. Whatever it is, it's changing the local environment. The cube shared images explaining why they detected its presence. The device wasn't just a teaching tool, it was gradually awakening dormant abilities in human DNA, starting with Thomas. Abilities that had been deliberately suppressed when humanity was sealed away on Earth. In his garden, flowers bloomed with unnatural vigor. Birds gathered on his fence, drawn to the subtle energy emanating from his property. The cube showed him why. It was restoring the natural connection between consciousness and matter that humans had once taken for granted. Through the mental link, Thomas learned the truth about human potential. The stiffness leaving his joints, his improving eyesight, the clearer thinking, these were just the beginning. Humans had once been capable of so much more: cellular regeneration, enhanced consciousness, even direct communication with the living energy of planets. But this knowledge came with a heavy price. The cube warned him that others would try to seize its power, to use it for their own purposes. It had chosen Thomas precisely because he understood something crucial: power wasn't meant to be hoarded, but shared for the benefit of all. By afternoon, more vehicles had arrived. A white van marked as a utility company, but Thomas knew better. Through his enhanced senses, he could feel the sophisticated scanning equipment inside, probing his house for answers. The cube's light flickered rapidly as it shared its most important revelation yet. It hadn't come to grant power to a chosen few, but to awaken humanity's collective memory. Every human carried this dormant potential. Thomas wasn't meant to be its master, he was meant to be its guardian until humanity was ready to remember its true heritage. As the sun began to set, Thomas made tea with hands that no longer shook. His joints moved smoothly, his back straight for the first time in decades. The cube had shown him that age itself was largely a limitation humans had accepted after forgetting their true nature. A knock at the door broke his contemplation. Through the peephole, he saw the men in suits, their faces professionally neutral. The cube's warning resonated in his mind. The next few moments would determine whether humanity's awakening would be guided by wisdom or controlled by fear. Thomas straightened his shoulders, feeling younger and stronger than he had in years. The cube's light steadied, ready to support whatever choice he made. Together, they had to find a way to protect this knowledge until the right moment, not just from those who would misuse it, but from humanity's own unreadiness to face its true potential. Taking a deep breath, he reached for the door handle, knowing that whatever happened next would set the course for humanity's future. Thomas opened the door to find exactly what he expected, two stern-faced agents holding up their badges. The younger one spoke first, his voice carefully neutral. "Sir, we're here about some unusual energy readings in the area. Mind if we come in and ask a few questions?" Through his enhanced senses, Thomas could feel their concealed weapons, the communication devices in their ears, and most importantly, their underlying anxiety. The cube had prepared him for this moment, teaching him to read not just words, but intentions. "Of course," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "Would you like some tea?" As they followed him to the kitchen, he felt their surprise at his vitality. He knew what they saw, a man who looked a decade younger than his driver's license photo, moving with the ease of someone half his age. The cube sat innocently on the kitchen table, looking like nothing more than a decorative paperweight. The older agent spoke while his partner scanned the room with a concealed device. "Mr. Thomas, satellite imagery shows some unusual patterns centered on your property. Plants growing out of season, unexplained energy signatures. Would you know anything about that?" Before Thomas could answer, their scanner began beeping frantically. The cube's surface rippled with light, and both agents reached for their weapons. But Thomas remained calm, remembering what the cube had taught him about fear and trust. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "what you're looking for is right here. But before you make any decisions, let me show you something." With a gentle thought, Thomas activated the cube's defensive protocols. The agents found themselves unable to move, frozen in place but completely unharmed. Their eyes widened as Thomas picked up the cube, its light pulsing steadily. "This isn't a weapon," he explained, letting them see the truth in his eyes. "It's a gift. A reminder of who we used to be, and who we could be again." The cube projected a gentle field of calming energy, slowly releasing the agents from their paralysis. Thomas felt their fear turning to wonder as the cube shared carefully selected images, just enough to help them understand without overwhelming them. "Others will come," the younger agent warned, holstering his weapon. "People who won't stop to listen." Thomas nodded. "I know. That's why I need your help." Over the next hour, as the sun set outside, Thomas explained everything he could. Not the cube's deepest secrets or humanity's full potential, they weren't ready for that yet. But enough to help them understand the importance of protecting this discovery until the right time. By the time they left, both agents had been subtly changed. The cube had touched their minds just enough to awaken their own dormant abilities ever so slightly. They would remember their visit not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a mystery to be protected. That night, as Thomas watched more vehicles gather at the end of his street, he understood the true challenge ahead. It wasn't just about protecting the cube, it was about finding the right balance between revealing too much too soon and keeping hope alive for humanity's awakening. The cube hummed reassuringly, reminding him that he wasn't facing this alone. Together, they would navigate the dangerous waters ahead, finding allies where they could, and staying one step ahead of those who would misuse this power. As he prepared for bed, feeling stronger and more alive than he had in decades, Thomas smiled at the irony. He'd spent his life looking for treasure with his metal detector, never imagining that the greatest discovery would be not gold or artifacts, but the key to humanity's forgotten legacy. The changes in Thomas's body accelerated over the next week. Each morning, he woke to discover something new. His white hair began showing strands of its original brown. The loose skin on his face had tightened, wrinkles smoothing away like ripples on a calming pond. His mind felt sharper than ever, processing information with remarkable clarity. But it was more than just physical changes. The cube had begun teaching him how to control the energy flowing through his rejuvenated body. In his garden, he could now feel the life force in each plant, gently encouraging growth with nothing but his thoughts. Birds and small animals were drawn to his presence, sensing something different about him. The surveillance continued, but changed in nature. The obvious government vehicles disappeared, replaced by more subtle observers. Sometimes he caught glimpses of people in nearby houses, watching through windows. The cube warned him that word of his transformation was spreading through classified channels. One quiet afternoon, as Thomas sat in his garden practicing his new abilities, a familiar voice called over the fence. "Your roses are blooming out of season," Mrs. Henderson said, her eyes wide with wonder. "And Thomas, you look different." He smiled at his elderly neighbor, realizing she was the first civilian to openly acknowledge the changes in him. The cube hummed softly in his pocket, suggesting that perhaps it was time to share a small part of the truth. "Would you like to see something remarkable?" he asked, inviting her to sit beside him on the garden bench. When she nodded, he gently took her arthritic hand in his. A soft blue glow passed between them, and her pain eased for the first time in years. Mrs. Henderson gasped, flexing her fingers with newfound mobility. "How did you?" "We all have this ability," Thomas explained carefully. "We've just forgotten how to use it." That evening, the cube shared more of humanity's forgotten history. He saw vast healing centers where people helped others awaken their natural abilities. He learned about the connection between consciousness and physical reality, understanding how the ancient humans had shaped their world through focused intention. The next morning, looking in the mirror, Thomas barely recognized himself. The man staring back appeared no older than 50, his eyes bright with inner light. But more significant than the physical changes was the deep sense of purpose he felt. He understood now why the cube had chosen someone his age. He had the wisdom to handle these changes responsibly. News of his transformation spread quietly through the neighborhood. People began finding excuses to walk past his house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who seemed to be aging backward. Some brought their sick pets, which always left healthier than they arrived. Others came with aching joints or minor ailments, drawn by whispered stories of miraculous healings. Thomas helped those he could, carefully following the cube's guidance about how much power to share. Each small healing, each moment of wonder, planted seeds of possibility in people's minds. The cube showed him how these tiny awakenings sparked subtle changes in the collective human consciousness. But with increased attention came greater risks. The cube warned him of powerful people who had noticed these events. People who would prefer humanity's greater potential remain dormant and controlled. They would be coming soon, not with surveillance equipment, but with more direct methods. That night, as Thomas sat in his study looking decades younger than his true age, the cube projected its most detailed message yet: the final phase approaches. Are you ready to show humanity what they could become? He stood, feeling the strength and vitality flowing through his transformed body. The cube had prepared him well, but he knew the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Whatever came next would determine not just his fate, but the future of human evolution itself. A fleet of black SUVs arrived at dawn. Thomas watched calmly from his porch as men in tactical gear established a perimeter around his property. But he felt no fear. The cube had prepared him for this moment. Through their deep connection, he could sense that this confrontation was necessary for humanity's next step. A distinguished-looking woman in a tailored suit stepped forward from the group. Her silver hair and commanding presence marked her as someone used to authority. "Mr. Thomas," she called out, "I'm Director Chen of the Advanced Technology Division. We need to discuss what's happening here." Thomas smiled, noticing how her eyes widened at his transformed appearance. He now looked like a man in his mid-40s, though his eyes held the wisdom of his true age. "Would you like to come in for tea, Director?" "Just you, your team can wait outside." Through his enhanced senses, he felt her internal struggle between caution and curiosity. Finally, she nodded, following him inside while speaking quietly into her earpiece. In his kitchen, the cube pulsed with welcoming light as Thomas prepared tea. Director Chen couldn't take her eyes off it. "Do you know," she asked carefully, "what that device really is?" "Better than you might think," Thomas replied, setting down her cup. "It's not just a piece of advanced technology. It's a key to remembering who we really are. The cube activated, filling the room with holographic images of humanity's true history. Director Chen watched in stunned silence as the story unfolded, how humans had once been part of an advanced galactic civilization, how they had developed abilities far beyond their current limitations. 15,000 years ago, Thomas explained, humanity faced a choice. Some wanted to use our abilities for control and dominance. Others believed we weren't ready for such power. In the end, those who wanted to protect us won. They sealed away our advanced abilities, leaving us to develop at our own pace on Earth. The cube showed the final days of that ancient time, the careful genetic modifications, the suppression of certain brain functions, the removal of humanity's most dangerous capabilities. We weren't abandoned, Thomas continued. We were protected. Like parents child-proofing a house. Director Chen sat quietly, processing this revelation. And now, she finally asked. Now humanity stands at another crossroads. The cube awakened in response to our current crisis, environmental destruction, nuclear weapons, growing social division. It's time for us to remember who we were, who we could be again. The cube projected its final truth, images of humans living in harmony with advanced technology, using their restored abilities not for power, but for healing and growth. It showed how the awakening would happen gradually, starting with those ready to handle the responsibility. That's why you chose me, isn't it? Thomas asked the cube. An old man who had nothing left to prove, who could demonstrate these changes without seeking personal gain. Director Chen stood, her hands trembling slightly as she straightened her jacket. The people I work for, they won't just accept this. They'll try to control it, study it, weaponize it if they can. They can try, Thomas said gently, letting a small display of his new abilities lift his teacup without touching it. But the cube can't be controlled or contained. It's not here to give power to a chosen few. It's here to remind all of humanity of what they've forgotten. As if in response, the cube's light spread through the room, touching Director Chen with its gentle glow. She gasped as years of chronic back pain suddenly eased, feeling a fraction of her own dormant potential awakening. We'll need help, Thomas said softly. People in positions of influence who understand what's really at stake. People who can help guide humanity through this transition. Director Chen looked at her hands, feeling the subtle energy flowing through them. Then she met Thomas's eyes, seeing in them the wisdom of age combined with renewed vitality. A decision formed in her mind, one that would change everything. Over the next few days, Thomas's house became the center of a carefully controlled operation. Director Chen had convinced her superiors to take a diplomatic approach, presenting the situation as a unique opportunity rather than a threat. Under her supervision, a small team of trusted scientists began studying the effects of the cube's presence. What they discovered amazed them. The energy field emanating from the cube was gradually affecting everyone who came near it. Young researchers found their minds sharper, older team members noticed their ailments easing. Plants in the research zone grew with extraordinary vigor, and even the local wildlife seemed more vibrant and healthy. Thomas watched it all with quiet satisfaction, knowing each small miracle brought humanity closer to accepting its greater potential. But the cube warned him that not everyone would welcome this awakening. Late one night, as Thomas sat in his study monitoring the subtle energy fields around his property, his enhanced senses detected movement in the shadows. A different team had arrived, one not authorized by Director Chen. They moved with military precision, using advanced equipment to avoid the official security sensors. The cube pulsed a warning, but Thomas remained calm. This confrontation was inevitable, the moment when humanity would have to choose between fear and growth. As the infiltration team breached his garden, Thomas stepped onto his porch. With a gentle thought, he activated the cube's defensive field. The armed men found themselves frozen in place, their weapons suddenly inert. "I understand your fear," Thomas called out softly. "Change is always frightening. but let me show you why you don't need to be afraid. One by one, he approached each soldier, placing a hand on their shoulders. Through the cube's power, he shared glimpses of humanity's potential future, not a world of chaos and uncontrolled power, but one of harmony and conscious evolution. When he released them from the field, not one reached for their weapons. They stood in stunned silence, their worldview fundamentally shifted by what they'd experienced. The team's leader, a hardened veteran, spoke first. How do we know this power won't be misused? That it won't fall into the wrong hands? Thomas smiled. Because it can't be taken or controlled. It can only be awakened in those who are ready, who understand that true power comes from wisdom and compassion. Director Chen arrived shortly after, having been alerted to the incursion. She found Thomas sharing tea with the would-be attackers, explaining how humanity's awakening would unfold. It's not about gaining power over others, he explained. It's about remembering our connection to each other and to all life. The abilities are just a side effect of that remembering. As dawn approached, the cube projected a vision of the choice humanity faced. One path showed the continuation of current trends, environmental destruction, growing conflicts, and eventual collapse. The other revealed a transformation, humanity gradually awakening to its true potential, learning to heal rather than harm, to create rather than destroy. The choice isn't just yours, Thomas told the assembled group. Every human will face this decision as their dormant abilities begin to stir. Will they choose fear or understanding? Control or cooperation? Director Chen stepped forward, her face resolute. We'll need to proceed carefully. Too much change too quickly could cause panic. Thomas nodded. The cube knows this. That's why it's designed to work gradually, awakening abilities only as fast as humanity can adapt to them. As the sun rose over his transformed garden, Thomas felt a deep sense of purpose. The confrontation had become an opportunity, turning potential enemies into allies. Each person present had experienced a taste of humanity's true potential, and through them, the truth would spread. The greatest challenge still lay ahead, helping humanity make the right choice when the awakening began to spread globally. But looking at the changed faces around him, Thomas felt confident. The seed of transformation had been planted, and it would grow in its own perfect time. 6 months after the cube's discovery, Thomas sat in his rejuvenated garden watching children from the neighborhood practicing their newly awakened abilities. Under careful supervision, they learned to communicate with plants, heal small injuries, and sense the energy flowing through all living things. His own transformation had stabilized, he now appeared to be a vital 50-year-old man, his hair a distinguished mix of brown and silver. But the greater transformation had been internal, a deep wisdom and understanding that he now shared with others. The government had eventually chosen a path of gradual disclosure. Around the world, similar cubes had begun appearing to selected individuals, teachers, healers, those whose hearts were ready to guide others. Each cube worked like the first, slowly awakening humanity's dormant potential while teaching the wisdom needed to use it responsibly. Director Chen had become one of the program's strongest advocates, helping to create a global network of awakening centers. There, people could safely explore their emerging abilities under the guidance of those who had already undergone the transformation. Thomas's garden had become the first of these centers. Today, he watched as Mrs. Henderson taught a group of elderly residents how to ease their own pain through conscious energy work. In another corner, young children sat in a circle, learning to sense each other's emotions and practice compassion. The cube hummed contentedly in his pocket, its work nearly complete. It had shown him that this was how change should happen, not through force or fear, but through gentle awakening and shared wisdom. Most importantly, humanity had begun to remember its true heritage. Not as conquerors of nature or each other, but as conscious beings capable of remarkable things when they worked in harmony. As the sun set on another remarkable day, a young girl approached Thomas. "Will you tell us the story again?" she asked. "About how you found the cube?" Thomas smiled, patting the bench beside him. Children gathered around as he began the tale they never tired of hearing. But this time, he understood something new. The cube hadn't just changed him or awakened humanity's potential. It had restored something precious that had been lost: hope. Looking at the children's shining faces, sensing their already awakening abilities, Thomas felt profound gratitude. He had lived long enough to see humanity take its first steps toward a new future, one where wisdom and power walked hand in hand. The cube pulsed one last time in his pocket, sharing its final message: the remembering has begun. Your task is complete. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling the connection to all the lives he had touched, all the changes he had helped set in motion. At 71 years old, he had been given the greatest gift of all: the chance to help humanity remember not just what it had been, but what it could become. In gardens and awakening centers around the world, other cubes pulsed in harmony with his. The great remembering was underway, unstoppable now, spreading hope and healing across the planet. And in his peaceful garden, surrounded by the next generation of awakened humans, Thomas knew that this was just the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure, the journey home to itself.